The final minutes of the show, and joining us now is Benji Ndolo. He's a political analyst, and Gabriel Musumba, who's also a political analyst. And you're welcome to our mega panel this morning. And we are discussing the home stretch, which is where we are. Benji, can you believe we have 13 days to a general election?
Can I believe?
Can you?
Less than 2 weeks.
Imagine that.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's been a journey and a half. It's been a short 5 years for the administration. Unfortunately, since the advent of multi-party politics and in this country, it seems like we're in endless campaign mode. That's not very good for the country. We must, from this election going forward, and I've said many times, we must now get serious about governance and distribution of resources, eradication of poverty in this country, not just the pursuit of power for privilege and for power's sake. We must, and I think my sister and brothers here will agree, we must now, through elections and through many different things, and start to provide solutions and leadership in this country, so that it's not just about wewe ulikula, sasa ni wakati wetu, and on, and it's a merry-go-round. All of people who've served this country before for many years, and who are just using, you know, phrases as sound bites and, you know, scorecard, track record, ulikuwa prime minister, wewe umefanya nothing, you know. So I think I'm calling on Kenyans through this statement to kind of have a sense of purpose beyond, you know, let's get these tribes another chance, let's change these tribes again. I think you get the point, Anne.
All right, Gabriel, your thoughts, the home stretch?
Actually, let me begin by agreeing with Benji. Hardly do I do this, but I think he's right when he says there has to be something more in matters of tangibility other than that just, you know, changing power. I think you've seen what the international media has actually said. You've seen our economists. They've come out and actually they are more like requesting. We cannot be a people who, after every 5 years, we must press the reset button and go back to where we were, you know, the previous 5 years. There has to be something that must bring us closer and together. Like every time after our elections, our economy is affected. We must go back, you know. We are asking for, do we still need people to come in and invest? And after every 5, so I think we need to set a stage like what we are seeing in Rwanda. Rwanda is actually, you know, coming of age. Now you can actually have an you know, an administration through and through, whereby you do not have an area where there is a serious issue of divorce from, you know, from matters investment and matters nationalism. And I think this is an area where we need to really look into, and we need actually to query our leaders. Is this the kind of politics that we want to play in the 21st century? So
but
as
you know, when you give Rwanda as your example for, you know, good governance, and there's a bit of a question mark there.
No, it's not me. It's not me. It's not me. And I'm just reporting to what I'm seeing. They are saying many investors are finding Rwanda as a nice place to invest because of the peace and the tranquility that they've been able to achieve. So all I'm saying is, must we push a reset button every 5 years when we come to an election? Is that the way we want our politics to be played? It's not me. Actually, look at what the communists, not the communists, the economists. Look at what the economists are saying. In fact, we carried it today on today's newspaper. Look at it, and it really puts Rwanda in a place where many people are feeling Rwanda has actually created a platform whereby there is what you'd call continuity, business continuity, rather than where, you know, after 5 years we do not know what will happen. So that's actually what I'm trying to do.
All right, Benji, you know, you talked about it being a journey. What for you has stood out, you know, in this particular campaign, even as we are now in the home stretch?
Good question. And what has stood out is, and by the way, I was up country yesterday, where I like to listen to the people. I like to listen to, you know, different people across the board. I implore my fellow, you know, analysts and friends and media people, don't confine yourself to Twitterati. Don't confine yourself to elitism. You know, actually travel and listen to what the farmers are saying, what the mamambogas in the towns are saying. And the former chief yesterday made a comment that I found very interesting, and is that in this particular campaign, and especially the stretch since the formation of the National Super Alliance, you go out there and you look at the president and his deputy, and you look at the crowds and you see the enthusiasm, and you get the feeling that Jubilee is coming back. But then the very next day in the places, this is a former chief telling me, NASA comes to town, and you look at the crowds and you look at the enthusiasm, and then you're left wondering, my goodness, what is happening? And who is telling you the truth? So you're telling me that you absolutely cannot call it, you cannot predict, you cannot say, because, you know, the Jubilee administration is using a lot of resources. They are, you know, playing their position as the leadership, and they're really commanding the numbers. I mean, given the fact, Anne, that the misperformance for the large part of Jubilee, there have been a lot of pitfalls, a lot of issues with corruption. It would be that you actually call a meeting and people are just not interested, because the team is a young team. We had high expectations that they can really do a lot. But now it's like they are still having a big following. They're still having momentum regardless, but Raila's team as well is also having the same. And so the chief said to me, my goodness, you can't really tell what is really going on, and I didn't have an answer for him.
All right, Sandra, what has been for you the highlights, the lowlights, if you like, of this campaign?
I'll start with the highlights. The highlights for me has been the role that the judiciary has played in setting us on the right track towards a free and fair election process, the cases that have been brought to it. And for me, it goes back to 2007 or even before that, where as a country we didn't have so much confidence in the judiciary, and we embarked on a lot of activities and initiatives to ensure that the judiciary is reformed, what many people are referring to as judicial reforms, where there's we are trying to inject more transparency and more accountability in the system. And we've seen over the last year and a half or 2 years, so to speak, the kind of cases and the kind of judgments that have come from the court have not only set precedents that will rely on over the time, but it has also ensured an environment where we can see the judiciary as a credible arbiter on issues of the Constitution. And it is my hope that this is something that we'll still hold on to even post the election, because it's highly likely that you're going to have a number of petitions after the election process. But then with the kind of foundation that we have set over the past few months, is that the judiciary is going to be the final arbiter, and will continue giving it the support it requires to ensure that our election-related disputes are adjudicated upon in the most appropriate manner.
Any low moments for you?
Oh, the low moments have been the threats. And I've said this before, warmongering, fear-mongering, threats, misinformation, which really I think it's time we move away from. And one of the things that people have been talking about is the role of the youth in this election process, and most importantly, as we move forward to 2022, I think it is a constituency that day in, day out is moving from the traditional ways in the way people are doing politics before, where tribalism conquered, and where you'd say things without being questioned. And I think it is a constituency that within the next 5 years we should continue working with and working for, to ensure that we are changing the narrative and we are changing the way we are doing politics moving ahead. So those are my low moments.
Brian?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you realize that while I'm echoing on a sentiment in terms of judicial independence that has been able to be exhibited in terms of how they've been carrying out their work, I must also actually say that the ability by the two protagonists to go back to their backyards to consolidate their vote is something that perhaps is a paradigm shift, if I might put it that way. Because initially we could not see Raila going to consolidate his, Luo Nyanza vote, but this time
was a given.
It was given. It was obvious. But because of the high levels of awareness in terms of the democratic space that Kenyans are enjoying, you can see at least there is that kind of a growth in terms of the ability to question the status quo, and perhaps look at an avenue where perhaps they would want to participate or change the the perception. But I also want to say that there has been a low moment, of course, in the way we dismantled the IEBC, the former IEBC, in terms of how we came up with the new set of commissioners. I think that was a low moment, in the sense that while we are inculcating a culture where we would want to see our institutions standing by their own feet, but here again we have a situation where as much as one wants to score some goals, we are likely to shift the goalposts. And also the role of civil society. And at a time like this in 2013, media houses were awash with civil society participation, with the paid up advertisements on why we need to go and vote. This time round I can see a sort of lackluster performance, interventions by civil society, and I don't know why they are not participating in this. I don't know whether they are broke or what is happening, but at least I can see that it is costly. But at a time like this, I would have expected the civil society to have actually up their game in terms of sensitizing Kenyans on matters of peace, the need to vote, and the need to exercise that fundamental right to vote.
Have they been perhaps more active at the courts?
Come again?
Have they then maybe shifted strategy? We've seen them more active going to court.
Maybe. I think that's also a new dimension on how we can look at the whole issue, because you can see they have been very much, at the background, using some vessels in terms of personalities to launch some cases in the court to address maybe some few legal bottlenecks here and there. And maybe they have shifted their, approach by using the courts other than, endearing themselves to the people through media houses.
All right, Jarvis.
Well, in this home stretch, the question that now rests on my mind is whether there's anything left to stretch the hopes and the imaginations of my fellow citizens. As we talk even of the highlights, I ask myself whether there is really light or much darkness. Because while there is excitement about the crowds, etc., one thing that has left me a little baffled is that some critical issues that would have arisen in this election cycle, especially appreciating how we now have devolved government, is how some people that were chastised throughout the past 4.5 years as being corrupt, some that were indicted by the Auditor General, are riding on the wave of fame and are likely to be re-elected in some other areas. And then again also how we need to see, for example, at Mashinani, and I agree with Menji, for example, conversations at the grassroots help you appreciate, for example, how the lives of the people have transformed, in development issues, the grassroots, etc. It must, when you watch television most of the time, you would be forgiven to imagine that this election is purely about the presidential issues alone and not how the transformation has or needs to take shape at the countryside. And I would not hesitate to agree with Lincoln, who said very many years ago that the election literally belongs to the people. If the people then turn their backs on issues and see it on fire, then it's up to them to nurse the blisters. And then now, as we go to this home stretch, question would be, to what extent are politicians willing not just to make just promises and then by that hope to be elected, but how they are actually going to be practical in their commitment to the issues that they are speaking to in this election, whether it's Jubilee, whether it's NASA, or all the other candidates running for president and the other elected positions.
Gabriel, let me ask you this, even as you make your comments on what has stood out for you throughout the campaign season. How, and of course the question of conceding an election largely also depends on the credibility of that poll itself. But what do you think it would do for the Republic to see one of these top two so-called horses actually come out, perhaps even before IEBC makes a final announcement saying, I have called my competitor, and congratulated him on his win? What would that just make time stop? Would the clouds start rolling back? And how important a moment, and this is, I mean, not to make light of it, but how important is this for a country like ours, given all the changes that we have made to institutions like IEBC, etc., and everything that has been done to try and safeguard this process?
I think, Anne, that's a very great question that you've asked, and I think this is where you would wait probably to just hold a little bit and see whether you'll get a lightning strike by you, but it will be a hooray moment. I think it will be I've always found it so edifying when we've seen in the leading democracies of the world, like the United States, where somebody will tell you before making their speech, they'll say, I received a gracious call from so and so, right. And then he will go to actually say the way that person or the contribution that his opponent has played, his or her opponent has played into the growth of their nation. And this is what I'd like. It's like me sitting somewhere, and sometimes you get so entangled politically that we do not even talk sense anymore. It would be wrong for somebody like me or my good friends here for us to sit and say, for the leading candidates, and say Uhuru has done nothing. That would be actually, it's a lie. Same thing I would say and say, Raila has done nothing in this country. Raila has played an important, not only a very integral part in shaping our democracy. So these are two great men who probably, as we've seen, they themselves, when they talk, they say, we are only separated by political differences. Are we, as Wananchi, are we able to grasp that? Do we know that there's something more bigger in this nation than just these two people? The fact that they have differences politically should not ensure that we tear this country apart. There's a question that you've asked, Anne, and I think when somebody comes out and say, or somebody becomes the first one, like we saw Uhuru in 2002 when he called a press conference and actually said, this is how the election has gone, and he conceded. That was a great moment. As much as it was emotional to the people who lost, they understood. And I think coming to this election, whoever loses, and I give kudos to Raila at Catholic University when he used the Swahili adage that atiyependa kushindwa si mshindani. Those are some of the remarks that I think this nation should be listening and hearing to. But again, when you look at our supporters, and this is where I say we need to be knowledgeable. We need to understand that after politics, after the election, Kenya will still remain. And as much as we would, sit down and analyze things and politic as much as we want, that is an ingredient that we know. For us, or for peace to be maintained, the ingredient of justice must actually suffice.
Right.
And for it to do so, it is a concerted effort. Both the Wananchi, and I think we cannot stress this enough for people to understand that Kenya must go on. Sandra, if you ask me for very quickly, I didn't get to answer the two things that have actually shaped, in Uhuru's government. And I'll do that very quickly. Education has been one. Education has been one, and health services. I think there has been a great improvement in that.
Okay, Sandra and Benji, I'll come to you both with my final question.
And would you allow me to touch on that?
No, I wouldn't.
You know why? I have a very important point.
Counted down. Benji, I will literally have to skip over you because I'm being counted down by my director. But if you would, please address yourself to this. As we approach the general election, in your mind, what two things, if you like, are Kenyans choosing between? What are the two arguments for you that are on the table?
And I wish you had allowed me that question to Sandra. Then I contextualize
I'm going over you and going to Sandra. Sandra, what are the two choices that Kenyans have to make?
Sorry, again?
The question is, in your mind, as you've listened to all the different schools of thought and the campaigns, what are the two choices before Kenyans?
The two choices before Kenyans. One, are you choosing, let me not put it from a choosing perspective, but they're looking at what will better their lives, and I think that is development. And second is stability. And from the development perspective, I'd say, and echoing from what Gabriel has said, we cannot say at this point that the current government has not done anything. And I think as much as we are politicking, there's a sense that there's something that has been done and we are moving towards the right direction. And I think beyond the political shenanigans, come August 10th or August 11th, then all these things will start sinking in, and then we'll say that indeed we've made progress, and these are the kind of progress we need to secure moving forward. And second, on stability, for me, which is something that's very critical. As much as we are having all these conversations about there want to be any peace if certain candidates do not get to power, I think there's also some sense of skepticism as far as issues of peace and insecurity are concerned. So for me, those are the two key ones. What is my life going to be post this election? And as I'm going for these elections, am I secure is my property and my life and that of my children and my family secure. So those two things are key for me as we move to the next.
Benji, I'm just going to give you grace and come back to you. You know Benji now.
You need to be a magistrate.
That route again. I'm just going to go to commercial. But just tell me this, Benji. In your mind, is this a choice between stability, more of the same, vis-a-vis the possibility of better?
What I think is, to be honest, it's supposed to be ideally the difference between status quo and change. So,
but what is it?
Honorable Raila, runs as a outside, change candidate. But is he really? So what it really is it's a continuation of the same. However, for purposes of fact that we are an ethnic, country, fact that we need to move towards, just having a change and dynamism. We have had 3 Kikuyu presidents, none Luo. I'm talking now real politics. So in that context, then the ascensions of NASA, the possible ascension of NASA to power, then for many would symbolize progressive change, even though why I'm saying it's more idealistic and more academic than reality,
right.
Jarvis, I'm sure you agree, is because our politics is not really what it should be, and it is built upon ethnic mobilization, which is an anomaly, which must change. And that's my challenge, especially to people of my generation, is to start building ideologies and building ideals. And finally, and what I wanted to say about Gabriel, which you forbid me, is you're talking about decency in politics. It is very important that as we do campaigns, that we embrace the culture of honesty, all right, the culture of leveling on issues, not just saying things like, Mogoroki or Ule Mlevi alianguka, etc. And once you have that kind of hygiene in politics, what we want it to be, then it becomes automatic and very naturally flowing, that it's not a business. You congratulate your opponent, you support them in governing the country, and you avoid polarizing and poisoning the country and wishing your opponent who defeated you ill. That is what I'm talking about, and in the context of decency. That was your question, and I just want to touch on that because it's very important.
And that brings us now to the end of this part of the show. My thanks to all our guests throughout the 3 hours that we've been on the air. We're taking a short break. We're back with these social media trends.